August 5, 1962. The body was discovered at 3:30 a.m., but the first newspaper headline had already been written 3 hours earlier. In the cramped offices of the Los Angeles Times, a night editor held a phone receiver with trembling hands, listening to a source he would never name. "Marilyn Monroe is dead," the voice said, and then the line went silent. But here's what makes this moment unforgettable. The press had been writing Marilyn's obituary for weeks. They had watched her crumble on film sets, documented her absences, cataloged her prescriptions, and turned her pain into front-page gold. The most famous woman in the world had become the most profitable tragedy in Hollywood history, and the cameras that made her a star had also loaded the gun. What happened in those final hours wasn't just the death of an actress, it was the culmination of a 12-year feeding frenzy where every stumble, every tear, every whispered rumor became tomorrow's headline. And the most disturbing part, some reporters had been positioning themselves outside her Brentwood home for days, waiting not to save her, but to be first with the story. Before we continue with this story that will reveal how the press both created and destroyed Hollywood's biggest icon, please subscribe to our channel. We bring you the untold stories behind the legends, the moments that changed history, and the truth that was never meant to be discovered. The transformation of Norma Jeane Baker into Marilyn Monroe wasn't just a Hollywood fairy tale, it was the most successful media manufacturing campaign in entertainment history. In the spring of 1952, Life magazine's senior editor received a portfolio of images from a struggling actress who had done everything from factory work to nude calendar modeling just to survive. The photos showed a woman with platinum blonde hair, a vulnerable smile, and something the camera loved in a way that defied explanation. Within weeks, that red swimsuit photograph landed on the cover of Life magazine with a headline that would define the rest of her existence: Hollywood's new sex symbol. What happened next was a carefully orchestrated campaign that turned a human being into a commodity, and the press was both the architect and the executioner of that transformation. Studio publicists at 20th Century Fox began feeding the press a carefully crafted narrative: the orphan girl who became a goddess, the small-town innocent who conquered Hollywood, the sex symbol with a heart of gold and a childlike vulnerability. Every interview was scripted, every photograph staged, every spontaneous moment captured by photographers positioned hours in advance. What made this media blitz so effective was its duality. Marilyn was simultaneously presented as unattainably glamorous and relatably vulnerable. Magazine covers showed her in diamonds and fur coats, while inside stories revealed her humble beginnings in foster homes and her struggles with loneliness. The press had discovered something powerful. Audiences didn't just want to admire Marilyn Monroe, they wanted to save her, and that protective instinct would keep them buying magazines for the next decade. By 1953, Marilyn Monroe appeared on more magazine covers than any other celebrity in America, but the machinery that had elevated her was already building the mechanisms of her destruction. Every interview required her to perform a version of herself that bore less and less resemblance to the anxious, intelligent woman beneath the platinum hair. Reporters asked the same questions about her measurements, her love life, her beauty secrets, reducing a complex human being to a collection of statistics and scandals, and Marilyn, desperate to maintain the career that had rescued her from poverty, performed the role they demanded even as it slowly suffocated the person she actually was. Joe DiMaggio had been one of the most celebrated athletes in American history, a man whose privacy was legendary. Marilyn Monroe was the most photographed woman in the world, a star whose every moment was considered public property. Their marriage was doomed from the moment it began, but what destroyed it wasn't incompatibility. It was the press's insatiable hunger for access to Marilyn's life. The wedding itself in January 1954 had been deliberately kept secret, but within hours someone had leaked the location, and by the time Marilyn and Joe emerged as husband and wife, hundreds of photographers were waiting. What should have been intimate became a circus, and Joe DiMaggio's face in those wedding photographs tells its own story, a man who had just realized he would never have his wife to himself because she belonged to the cameras first. The marriage lasted 9 months, but the press had been documenting its failure from day one. Every dinner became a tabloid analysis of their body language. Every public appearance was scrutinized for signs of tension. But the moment that truly destroyed their marriage happened in September 1954, and it was a moment the press had deliberately orchestrated for maximum spectacle. The 7-Year Itch was filming in New York City, and the movie's most famous scene required Marilyn to stand over a subway grate while air blew her white dress up around her waist. Somehow, the exact time and location leaked to every newspaper and radio station in New York. By midnight on September 15th, more than 5,000 people had gathered on Lexington Avenue, pressing against police barricades, all desperate to witness Marilyn Monroe's skirt blow up in person. And positioned at the front, given prime access by the studio's publicity department, were dozens of photographers from every major publication in America. What happened over the next 2 hours wasn't just a movie scene, it was a public performance of Marilyn's sexuality, orchestrated by the press and demanded by a crowd whipped into frenzy. Director Billy Wilder called for take after take, not because the scene wasn't working, but because the photographers kept screaming for more, for higher, for better angles. Marilyn stood on that subway grate, with hundreds of flashbulbs exploding in her face, and thousands of men calling out from the darkness, performing her sexuality on command because that was the job the press had created for her. And Joe DiMaggio, who had come to support his wife but instead found himself watching her become a spectacle for strangers' entertainment, turned and walked away into the New York night. The marriage was over. When Marilyn filed for divorce in October 1954, appearing at the Los Angeles courthouse with tears streaming down her face and dark sunglasses hiding her swollen eyes, those same photographers captured her devastation for the morning edition. The headline read, "Marilyn Monroe's marriage crumbles after just 9 months," accompanied by a photograph of her grief so raw it should have been private. But nothing in Marilyn's life was allowed to be private because the press had decided that her pain was content and content was profit. If the press had been invasive during Marilyn's marriages, they became absolutely predatory when rumors began circulating about her connections to President John F. Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy. The speculation exploded on May 19, 1962, when Marilyn appeared at Madison Square Garden to sing "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" at John F. Kennedy's 45th birthday celebration. Marilyn, sewn into a sheer, flesh-colored dress covered in rhinestones, breathily sang the most famous birthday song in history to the president, while 15,000 people watched and television cameras broadcast the moment to millions. The press went absolutely wild with speculation. Gossip columnists who had previously used careful innuendo now published barely disguised accusations of an affair. Newspapers ran photographs of Marilyn and Kennedy together, analyzing their body language for evidence of romantic involvement. And Marilyn found herself at the center of a political firestorm that threatened both her career and her safety. By 1962, she was no longer just a movie star, she was a potential political liability, a woman who knew powerful men and was struggling with depression and medication dependency, which made her unpredictable and dangerous to people who had far more to lose than she did. The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover's direction, had been monitoring Marilyn for years, but after the Kennedy birthday celebration, that surveillance intensified dramatically. FBI files declassified decades later reveal that agents were documenting Marilyn's phone calls, her visitors, her movements, and the press, whether they knew about the FBI surveillance or not, were conducting their own investigation, pressuring sources to confirm the Kennedy rumors, staking out Marilyn's Brentwood home, following her to doctor's appointments. What should have been a private matter became a public spectacle, and Marilyn was trapped at the center with no way to defend herself. If she denied the rumors, the press accused her of lying. If she refused to comment, they treated her silence as confirmation. By April 1962, when filming began on Something's Gotta Give, Marilyn Monroe was fighting for survival on multiple fronts. She was struggling with severe depression and anxiety, dependent on prescription medications that were making her increasingly unreliable, caught in the Kennedy scandal, and attempting to complete a film for a studio that had grown tired of accommodating her struggles. 20th Century Fox had given Marilyn one final chance, and they had made it clear that if she failed, her career was over. The press knew all of this, and they positioned themselves to document what they clearly believed would be Marilyn's final professional collapse. Marilyn was dealing with severe sinusitis that left her feverish and exhausted, but she showed up to work anyway because she knew the studio was looking for reasons to fire her. When her illness worsened and she had to miss several days of filming, gossip columnists immediately published stories about her unprofessional behavior. When she returned to set, clearly sick but determined to work, the press took photographs of her looking exhausted, publishing them with captions about her deteriorating appearance and speculation about her medication use. The breaking point came in late May when Marilyn asked for time off to perform at President Kennedy's birthday celebration. Fox executives denied the request, but Marilyn went anyway. When she returned to Los Angeles, the studio was furious, and they began leaking stories about Marilyn's diva behavior. But Marilyn returned from New York energized. She showed up on time, delivered strong performances, and even agreed to film a nude swimming scene that generated enormous positive publicity. For a brief moment, it seemed like Marilyn might salvage both the production and her career. Then on June 1, 1962, 20th Century Fox held a press conference and announced that Marilyn Monroe was being fired from Something's Got to Give for chronic unprofessionalism and medication-related absences, and that they were suing her for production costs already incurred. What happened in the 2 months between Marilyn's firing and her death was one of the most brutal media campaigns in Hollywood history. Fox executives provided reporters with detailed accounts of every day Marilyn had missed, every late arrival, every forgotten line. They leaked medical information about her prescription medication use. And the press, which had spent a decade building Marilyn Monroe into the biggest star in the world, turned on her with a viciousness that suggested they had been waiting for permission to tear her down. Newspapers ran headlines like "Marilyn Monroe, Hollywood's Biggest Liability," and "The Star Who Destroyed Herself." Magazine profiles that had once gushed about her beauty now analyzed her tragic flaws and self-destructive tendencies. But the most devastating coverage came from publications that treated Marilyn's firing as if it were her obituary, writing retrospectives about her career in past tense as if she were already dead. Photoplay published a piece in July 1962 titled "Whatever Happened to Marilyn Monroe" that chronicled her rise and fall as if her life were already over. Life magazine ran a photo essay about troubled stars with Marilyn featured as the prime example of fame's destructive power. These weren't just cruel, they were dangerous because they sent a message to Hollywood that Marilyn Monroe was finished, unemployable, no longer worth the investment. And Marilyn, reading these articles in her Brentwood home, isolated and terrified, and watching her career collapse in real time, descended into a depression that would prove fatal. Her psychiatrist would later tell investigators that Marilyn was devastated by the media coverage, that she felt betrayed by an industry and a press corps that had once adored her. The cruelest irony was that by late July 1962, Fox had decided to rehire Marilyn for Something's Got to Give. Her co-star Dean Martin had refused to continue without her. Marilyn's agents were negotiating a new contract that would have paid her $1 million and given her unprecedented creative control. After months of nightmare publicity, Marilyn was on the verge of the greatest comeback in Hollywood history. But the press didn't know about the negotiations, or if they did, they chose not to report them. The narrative had already been written. Marilyn Monroe was washed up, broken, finished. In the first days of August 1962, several reporters and photographers had positioned themselves near Marilyn's Brentwood home, waiting for something they couldn't quite articulate, but somehow knew was coming. On Friday, August 3rd, Marilyn gave her final interview to photographer George Barris. The photographs from that session would later become iconic. Marilyn on the beach in Malibu, sometimes laughing, sometimes pensive, always heartbreakingly beautiful despite the exhaustion visible in her eyes. But what Barris remembered most was what Marilyn said during their final conversation. "The press made me and the press is killing me. They built this image of who I'm supposed to be, and now they're angry at me for not being her anymore. But I was never her. I was always just Norma Jeane trying to survive." On Saturday, August 4th, Marilyn spent the day at home, making and receiving phone calls, speaking with her psychiatrist. Multiple people would later report speaking with her that night. Some said she sounded fine, others said she sounded distressed. The timeline has never been definitively established. What is known is this. Sometime during the night of August 4th or the early morning of August 5th, Marilyn Monroe took or was given a fatal combination of barbiturates. Whether it was suicide, accidental overdose, or something more sinister remains one of Hollywood's greatest unsolved mysteries. The Los Angeles Police Department wasn't officially notified until 4:25 a.m., though evidence suggests she had been dead for several hours. But somehow, before the police had even arrived, before any official statement had been released, reporters were already positioning themselves outside Marilyn's Brentwood home. By dawn, the street looked like a Hollywood premiere, with television trucks, photographers, and reporters crowding against police barricades, all fighting for the best angle, the most dramatic shot. This wasn't grief, it was a feeding frenzy, the final act of a performance the press had been directing for 12 years. Within hours of Marilyn's death being confirmed, magazines that typically had weeks-long production schedules were publishing comprehensive life and death issues. Gossip columnists, who had spent months documenting her professional collapse, now wrote emotional tributes about her tragic vulnerability. The same publications that had written "Whatever Happened to Marilyn Monroe" weeks earlier now ran retrospectives celebrating her as an icon gone too soon. The hypocrisy was staggering. The press hadn't just documented Marilyn's rise and fall, they had orchestrated it, profited from it, and now they were ready to profit from her death. But if the press had helped destroy Marilyn Monroe in life, they discovered something even more profitable in death: eternal mystery. Within days, newspapers began publishing stories that questioned the official narrative. Why was there a delay in calling the police? Why were there inconsistencies in the timeline? Why were certain phone records missing? Each question spawned a dozen more, and each unanswered question became the foundation for a new theory, a new investigation, a new reason for readers to buy next week's issue. The Kennedy rumors, which had been tabloid speculation in life, became central to the death investigation. Reporters claimed that Robert Kennedy had been at Marilyn's house the night she died, though no credible evidence has ever confirmed this. Others suggested that Marilyn was murdered because she knew too much, that her diary contained information that could destroy the presidency. None of these theories has ever been substantiated with concrete evidence, but that didn't matter. The press had discovered that a dead Marilyn Monroe could sell just as many magazines as a living one, possibly more, because death had transformed her from a troubled actress into an eternal mystery. Over the decades since 1962, thousands of books, articles, documentaries, and investigations have been produced about Marilyn Monroe's death, each promising to finally reveal the truth, while actually just recycling the same questions and theories. The press created an industry out of Marilyn's tragedy, one that continues to this day, where her image is endlessly reproduced, her life story constantly retold, and her death perpetually investigated by people who never knew her but feel entitled to her story because the press made her public property decades ago. 60 years after her death, Marilyn Monroe remains one of the most recognizable faces in the world, her image reproduced on everything from posters to coffee mugs to expensive art prints. But the woman behind that image, Norma Jeane Baker, who survived foster homes and poverty to become a movie star, who read Dostoevsky and studied method acting and fought against the studio system, has been almost entirely erased by the mythology the press created. The Marilyn Monroe that exists in public consciousness is a fiction, a character created by publicists and journalists who needed her to be simultaneously glamorous and vulnerable, sexy and innocent, confident and desperate for approval. They needed her to be impossible, because impossibility guaranteed that she would eventually fail, and her failure would sell just as many magazines as her success. The real tragedy of Marilyn Monroe isn't just that she died at 36. The real tragedy is that she spent most of her adult life performing a role that had been written for her by people who profited from her performance, and when she tried to write her own story, to be more than the sex symbol the press had created, they punished her for it. Every attempt at serious acting was mocked, every intellectual interest was treated as pretension, every relationship was analyzed through the lens of sex appeal rather than genuine connection. And when her mental health deteriorated under the impossible pressure of maintaining a persona that bore no resemblance to her actual self, the press documented her collapse as if it were entertainment rather than tragedy, as if they bore no responsibility for the machinery of fame that had ground her down. The press made Marilyn Monroe, and the press killed her. Not directly, not with their own hands, but through a 12-year campaign of objectification, invasion, and exploitation that left her with no privacy, no peace, and no way to exist outside the character they had created. They watched her struggle and turned it into content. They documented her pain and called it journalism. They positioned themselves outside her home in her final days, waiting for the end they had helped orchestrate, ready to be first with the story that would sell 1 million papers. And when she died, they wrote beautiful tributes about her vulnerability and her tragedy, as if they hadn't been the ones who made her vulnerable, as if they hadn't been the architects of her tragedy. Marilyn Monroe's story is often told as a cautionary tale about the price of fame, but that's not quite right. Her story is a cautionary tale about what happens when the press decides that a human being is public property, when someone's life becomes content to be consumed, when the machinery of media and celebrity becomes more important than the person trapped inside it. And that machinery didn't die with Marilyn Monroe in 1962. It evolved, became more sophisticated, reached more people through television and internet and social media. The tools changed, but the fundamental dynamic remained the same. The press builds people up to tear them down, because both the rise and the fall generate profit, and the human cost is considered acceptable collateral damage. Every celebrity who has struggled with mental health, every famous person who has been hounded by photographers can trace a direct line back to how the press treated Marilyn Monroe. She was the prototype, the test case that proved the model worked. The final words belong to Marilyn herself from that interview in July 1962, just weeks before her death. "I'm not a thing. I'm not an object. I'm a person, a human being, and I deserve to be treated like one. But nobody sees me. They see this image, this character, this thing they've created, and they love her or hate her or want to possess her, but none of it has anything to do with me. The real me disappeared a long time ago. Maybe she never existed at all. Maybe Norma Jeane died the day Marilyn Monroe was born, and everything since then has just been a performance for cameras that never stop rolling, for an audience that never stops watching, for a press that turns every moment of my life into a headline. I'm so tired of performing. But if I stop, if I let them see how tired I am, they'll destroy what's left of me." There was nothing left to give, and in the early morning hours of August 5, 1962, the cameras finally stopped rolling. The woman who had been created by headlines died alone, her final words unheard, her truth buried beneath decades of mythology and speculation and profit-driven investigation. The press made Marilyn Monroe. The press killed Marilyn Monroe. And the press has been selling her death for 60 years. That's not a tragedy, that's an industry.